Imagine a line of men, not a small group, not a caravan, but a sea of bronze and iron. 50,000 soldiers. To put that in perspective, imagine a modern football stadium filled to capacity. Every seat taken. Now, imagine every single one of those people is a trained killer. They are armed with spears of seasoned wood, shields of thick oxhide and bronze, and bows that can pierce armor from 100 yards. These weren't amateurs. They weren't forced peasants. These were the elite of the Persian Empire, the greatest superpower the world had ever seen. These men had marched through the gates of Babylon. They had seen the fall of the greatest cities in the East. They believed, with every fiber of their being, that they were invincible. To a Persian soldier of this era, the king was not just a man. He was the shadow of God on earth. To follow his command was to fulfill a cosmic destiny. Now, imagine this massive, iron-willed force standing at the very edge of the Great Sand Sea. Behind them lay the Nile, the lifeblood of Egypt, fertile, green, and safe. Ahead of them lay nothing but an endless, shifting ocean of gold and death. No roads, no landmarks, no mercy. In the ancient world, the desert was not just a place, it was a monster. It was a realm of demons and chaos where the laws of men did not apply. And yet, at the command of a king, they march. 100,000 boots begin to churn the dust. The sound is like thunder moving across the earth. Step by step, they move away from the water, deeper into a landscape that was never meant for human life. Hours turn into days. The initial discipline, the rhythmic marching begins to falter. The heat isn't just a feeling, it's a physical weight. It presses down on their helmets. It turns their bronze armor into a furnace. Every piece of equipment, every spear tip becomes a branding iron. And then something happens. Something so sudden, so violent, and so overwhelming that in a single afternoon, an entire superpowers division simply ceases to exist. No survivors. No final message carried back by a lucky scout. No skeletons left bleaching in the sun for later travelers to find. Just silence. For over 2,500 years, their fate has remained the ultimate cold case of history. A story whispered by desert nomads and debated by scholars in ivory towers. Some called it a legend, a ghost story to warn people of the desert's power. But what if it wasn't? What if 50,000 men really did vanish into thin air? Today, we go beneath the dunes. We look past the myth to find the bone and bronze buried in the deep. This is the story of the lost Persian army, history's most haunting unsolved disappearance. To understand why 50,000 men would march to their deaths, we have to understand the world of 525 BC. This was a time before the concept of nations as we know them. The world was a collection of city-states and vast, empty spaces ruled by the shadow of empires. And in this era, the shadow of the Persian Empire was the longest. At its peak, the Achaemenid Empire was a marvel of human organization. It stretched from the Indus Valley in the east to the shores of Greece in the west. They had built the Royal Road, a highway that allowed messengers to travel 1,600 miles in 9 days. They were masters of logistics, masters of war, and masters of men. But Egypt was different. Egypt was old. Even in 525 BC, the pyramids were already 2,000 years old. The Persians were the new money of the ancient world, and they wanted the prestige of the pharaohs. And at the head of this monster was King Cambyses II. He was the son of Cyrus the Great, the man who had founded the empire. Imagine the pressure of being the son of a living god. Cyrus was known as a liberator, a wise king who allowed the Jews to return to Jerusalem and respected local customs. Cambyses, however, was carved from a different stone. He was brilliant, yes, but he was volatile. He was a man obsessed with outdoing his father's legacy. He didn't want to be a wise king. He wanted to be an absolute one. In 525 BC, he achieved what many thought impossible. He conquered Egypt. He defeated the pharaoh Psamtik III at the Battle of Pelusium, allegedly by using a psychological trick, placing cats, which the Egyptians held sacred, in front of his front lines so the Egyptians wouldn't fire their arrows. It was a victory of cold, calculating intellect. But Egypt was a land of deep magic and ancient gods. Even with the pharaoh gone, the spirit of the people remained tied to their religion. And deep in the western desert, at the Siwa oasis, sat the oracle of Ammonius. This wasn't just a temple, it was the ultimate authority. Even Alexander the Great would later trek there to prove his divinity. When Cambyses asked for the oracle's blessing to rule as pharaoh, the oracle didn't just say no. It delivered a prophecy of doom. It claimed Cambyses' reign would be short and his end would be cursed. In an empire built on the divine right of kings, this was a political nuclear bomb. If the oracle said he wasn't the rightful king, the Egyptian people would never stop rebelling. Cambyses didn't see a temple. He saw a target. He decided that if the gods wouldn't support him, he would simply remove the gods from the map. He would send an army so large that the desert itself would bow before him. He would erase the oracle, and with it, the last spark of Egyptian defiance. It was a move of pure ego, and it was the first step toward a catastrophe that would echo through the ages. The mission was simple on paper, but a nightmare in reality. The army would depart from the city of Thebes. Their goal: march 400 miles through the heart of the Sahara to the Siwa oasis, burn the temple to the ground, and enslave the priests. But look at the logistics. 50,000 men. A human being in a desert environment needs at least 2 gallons of water a day just to survive. That's 100,000 gallons of water every single day. There are no rivers in the Great Sand Sea. There are no wells. The army had to carry everything. Imagine the baggage train. Thousands of camels and donkeys, laden with heavy clay jars of water and sacks of grain. For every soldier, there was a support animal, and those animals needed water and food too. The math of the mission was against them before they even started. If a single camel died, its water load had to be distributed or abandoned. The margins for error were zero. If they were delayed by even 48 hours, the entire force would begin to perish from thirst. But Cambyses' generals were seasoned. They had fought in the mountains of Persia and the plains of Babylon. They relied on the water bridge, a system where scouts and local Bedouin guides would go ahead and bury supplies in secret caches. They believed that through sheer Persian discipline, they could overcome nature itself. As they left Thebes, the mood was likely one of grim confidence. They were the immortals and the sons of the empire. They marched in tight formation. In the morning, the desert air is deceptively cold, almost freezing. But as the sun rises, the temperature climbs. 100 degrees, 110, 120. The heat begins to radiate off their bronze breastplates. The salt from their sweat stings their eyes. Every breath feels like inhaling fire. But the drums keep beating. They march. They were 7 days into the desert, a place the locals called the Land of the Ghost, when they reached an oasis known as Karga. This was the point of no return. From Karga, they turned northwest, heading into the Great Sand Sea. This is where the maps ended. This is where the guides grew quiet. This was no longer a march. It was a gamble with the gods. They were moving into a part of the world where the wind can change the landscape in an hour, turning a valley into a mountain and a path into a grave. By day 10, the green world of the Nile was a distant memory. The soldiers were now trapped in a world of 2 colors, the blinding blue of the sky and the relentless gold of the sand. The desert has a way of breaking the human mind. It's called visual deprivation. When the horizon never changes, when every dune looks like the one you passed an hour ago, your brain starts to manufacture its own reality. This is the birth of the mirage. Imagine being a Persian spearman. Your tongue is swollen from thirst. Your water ration for the day is a single, lukewarm cup that tastes of goat skin and dust. You look ahead and see a shimmering lake. You see palm trees. You can almost hear the sound of splashing water. You find a sudden burst of energy pushing forward, only for the image to dissolve into heat waves. The psychological blow of a mirage is more painful than the physical thirst. It breaks your hope. And then there is the silence. In the deep desert, when the wind stops, the silence is so heavy it rings in your ears. You hear the blood pumping in your temples. You hear the creak of your own leather armor like it's a shout. For 50,000 men, the only sound was the collective shuffle of feet and the occasional groan of a dying camel. Discipline, the very thing that made the Persians elite, began to crack. Men started to drop. In a modern army, you would stop for the fallen. In the Persian desert march, if you stopped, you died. To break formation to help a friend was to risk the lives of the entire unit. The serpent of bronze began to leave a trail behind it, a trail of discarded shields, dead animals, and men left to the sun. The nights brought no comfort. The temperature would plummet 50 degrees in a few hours. Men huddled together, shivering in the same cloaks that had baked them hours before. They looked up at stars they didn't recognize. They were in a place that felt alien, a place that didn't want them there. They were halfway to Siwa. 25,000 men were likely already showing signs of advanced heat exhaustion, confusion, lack of sweat, and the beginning of the end. It happened on the 7th day after they left the Karga oasis. The morning began with an eerie stillness. The birds that usually followed the baggage train for scraps had vanished. The air felt heavy, charged with static electricity. The soldiers noticed the sand under their feet beginning to sing, a low, humming vibration caused by the wind moving through the dunes. Then, on the horizon, they saw it. Not a cloud, but a wall. A solid, mountain-sized wave of dark red and ochre, stretching as far as the eye could see. It was the Cambyses. In the Sahara, a sandstorm isn't just wind with dust in it. It's a localized collapse of the atmosphere. The wind speeds can hit 90 miles per hour. The sand is so thick you can't see your own hand in front of your face. But more importantly, it creates a vacuum effect. It strips the oxygen from the air. The Persian commanders gave the only order they could: form a wall. Shields up. They tried to huddle together, using their massive oxhide shields to create a barrier against the stinging grit. But the sand was like liquid. It found every crack. It filled their nostrils. It filled their ears. Imagine the panic. 50,000 men, blinded, unable to breathe, hearing nothing but the scream of the wind. Command was swallowed. Men tried to hold onto the belt of the man in front of them, but the force of the wind tore them apart. The sand didn't just blow over them, it settled. In a major Saharan storm, dunes can move feet in minutes. As men fell from suffocation, the sand quickly drifted over them. If you sat down for a moment to catch your breath, you were covered in seconds. The weight of the sand is immense. Once it's over your legs, you can't stand up. You are pinned to the earth. The storm likely lasted for hours, perhaps days. And when the wind finally died down and the dust settled, the sun came out over a world that was perfectly still. The dunes had shifted. The 50,000 men, the thousands of animals, the thousands of jars of water, all of it was gone. Not a single spear tip was left sticking out of the ground. The desert had simply closed its mouth. Let's step back and look at the logistics. To understand the scale of this loss, you have to understand the Persian military machine. Each soldier carried a kit that weighed nearly 60 pounds. They carried a geryn, a wicker or leather shield, and a sparus, a short spear. They wore tunics of reinforced linen and caps of felt. Against a human enemy, they were invincible. Against the Sahara, they were wearing heavy rags that trapped heat and weight that dragged them into the dunes. The Persian supply chain was the eighth wonder of the world. They used a system of satraps to ensure that wherever an army marched, there was grain and wine waiting. But the western desert of Egypt was outside the satrapy. It was a no-man's land. The Persians were essentially trying to build a bridge of bodies across a sea of fire. And then there was the biology. When a human body hits 110 degrees, it begins to shut down. The first stage is heat syncope, dizziness, and fainting. But in the Sahara, you cannot faint. If you faint, the sand enters your lungs immediately. The next stage is anhidrosis. The body stops sweating because it has no more water to lose. At this point, your internal organs begin to cook. Your brain begins to swell. You start to see things that aren't there, not just mirages, but hallucinations of your home, your family, your life back in Susa. Imagine 50,000 men all going through this at the same time. The discipline breaks. The immortals become terrified children. They start to run in random directions. They scream at the sky. They beg the gods of Persia to save them from the gods of Egypt. But the sun doesn't care. The sun is an indifferent god. For decades after, the Persian Empire waited. They waited for a messenger. They waited for a ragged group of survivors to crawl out of the dunes. But no one came. The primary source for this story is Herodotus, the father of history. Writing about 75 years after the event, he traveled to Egypt and interviewed the locals. He wrote, "A wind arose from the south, strong and deadly, bringing with it vast columns of whirling sand, which entirely covered up the troops and caused them wholly to disappear." For 2,000 years, historians treated Herodotus' account as a tall tale. They thought it was Orientalist exaggeration, a way to make the desert seem more magical and dangerous than it was. Skeptics argued that even the biggest sandstorm couldn't bury 50,000 men so completely that no trace would ever be found. In the 1800s, the golden age of archaeology, explorers began to hunt for the lost army as if it were El Dorado or Atlantis. They used the same route Cambyses took. They found nothing. Famous explorers like Laszlo Almasy, the man who inspired the English Patient, spent years flying over the Great Sand Sea looking for any sign of a massive bone field. He found ancient pottery, he found tools, but he never found the army. The mystery became a black hole in archaeology. How does an army, a physical mass of metal and bone, just evaporate? This led people to stop looking at the clouds and start looking at the maps. Perhaps the storm was a cover-up. Perhaps the truth was far more human. If it wasn't a superstorm, what happened? Let's look at the evidence. Could it have been a tactical ambush? Some modern historians believe the sandstorm was a story made up by Cambyses to hide a military embarrassment. They suggest the army was actually intercepted by a massive force of Egyptian rebels and Bedouin tribes who knew the terrain. In the middle of the night, at their most vulnerable, the Persians were slaughtered. The bodies were then buried by the locals to prevent Persian retaliation, or perhaps a simple wrong turn. The Great Sand Sea is a labyrinth. If the guides were Egyptian, they might have been double agents. Imagine leading an army not to an oasis, but into the hollow quarter, where there is zero water. They wouldn't need a storm to die. They would just need 3 days of walking in the wrong direction. The army would have scattered in a desperate search for water, dying in small groups over hundreds of square miles. This would explain why no single mass grave has been found. Then there is the possibility of internal mutiny. 50,000 men under extreme stress are a powder keg. If the water ran low, the soldiers likely turned on their officers. A civil war in the middle of the dunes would have left the survivors too weak to finish the march or return home. Some suggest a more scientific cause: carbon dioxide poisoning. A fringe but fascinating theory suggests the army camped in a low-lying depression in the desert. Some desert basins can trap pockets of carbon dioxide or other volcanic gases. The army might have gone to sleep and simply never woken up, buried later by natural wind cycles. Finally, we look at the Castiglione discovery. In 2009, Italian researchers claimed they found the smoking gun. They found a natural rock shelter near Siwa. Under the sand, they found Persian-style bronze daggers, arrowheads, and, most importantly, hundreds of human bones. They believe the army didn't vanish all at once, but that the storm drove them to this shelter where they eventually died of thirst and exhaustion. Today, we have tools that Herodotus could never have imagined. We have ground-penetrating radar and satellite synthetic aperture radar. These tools can see through up to 30 feet of dry sand to reveal the structures beneath. In the last decade, these satellites have revealed something incredible. The Sahara was once green. It has ghost rivers and fossil lakes hidden beneath the dunes. But they have also revealed anomalies, metallic signatures that don't match the surrounding geology. The search for Cambyses' army has moved from the ground to the lab. Scientists are now analyzing the bone fragments found by the Italian team. If the DNA matches the Persian plateau, the mystery is solved. But many archaeologists remain skeptical. They argue that 50,000 men would leave a debris field that would be visible from space. The truth is likely a combination of everything. A botched mission, a betrayal by guides, a desperate struggle for water, and a final, merciful blow by a Saharan storm. The desert didn't just kill them, it archived them. It took a moment of imperial arrogance and froze it in a layer of silica and heat. The story of the lost army matters because it is a bridge between the world of myth and the world of science. It reminds us that even in our modern world of GPS and satellites, there are places on this planet that can still swallow the greatest things we build. After everything we've explored, the power, the mystery, the unanswered questions, we're left with something deeper than history. Because this isn't just a story about an army. It's a story about human ambition, about power, and the illusion of control. The Persian Empire was one of the greatest forces the world had ever seen. It controlled vast lands, commanded enormous armies, shaped the course of civilizations. And yet, even at the height of that power, it couldn't control the desert. That's what makes this story timeless. Because even today, we like to believe we're in control of our world, of our environment, of our future. But nature has always had the final say. One storm, one wrong decision, one moment can change everything. And sometimes there are no second chances. But it's not just about nature. It's about people. Those 50,000 soldiers, they weren't just numbers. They were individuals, men with lives, families, stories of their own, each one stepping into the desert, believing they would return. And yet, history remembers them only as a mystery, a question without an answer, a disappearance without closure. There's something haunting about that, because it reminds us how easily stories can be lost, how quickly lives can fade from memory when there's no one left to tell them. And maybe that's why this story still resonates, not just because of what happened, but because of what we'll never fully know, the uncertainty, the silence. The idea that somewhere out there, the truth still exists, hidden just beyond our reach. It challenges us to question what we think we know, to look deeper into the past, and to remember that history isn't always complete. Because sometimes the most powerful stories aren't the ones with clear endings. They're the ones that leave us wondering. And this is one of them. Somewhere beneath the endless sands of the Egyptian desert, the truth still lies buried. 50,000 men frozen in time, not as warriors, not as conquerors, but as a mystery. No final battle cry, no message sent back home, no graves marked with their names. Just silence. The desert moved on. The empire moved on. History moved on. Cambyses II continued his rule. The Persian Empire endured, but the army he sent into the desert was never seen again. And maybe that's the most haunting part of all. Not just that they disappeared, but that the world kept going as if they never existed. No closure. No answers. Only questions echoing across time. What really happened out there? Was it the storm? The desert? An unseen enemy? Or something we still don't understand? We may never know. But maybe that's what gives this story its power. Because in a world where we search for certainty, this is a reminder that some mysteries remain unsolved. And somewhere, beneath those shifting sands, the lost army still rests. Waiting, silent, forgotten, but never truly gone. The wind still blows at Siwa. The sands still shift in the Great Sand Sea. And somewhere, 50,000 sets of eyes are still looking toward the horizon, waiting for an order that will never come. What do you think really happened to the lost army? Was it nature or something more? Let us know in the comments. If you want more powerful, untold stories like this, subscribe to the Legend Chronicles and turn on notifications. Because the greatest stories in history are the ones still waiting to be uncovered.